Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome to another episode in our Wargaming storage video series. Now, it's been a while since I've done one of these, and the reason for that is really that I only film one of these when I have something new to say. Well, here's something that I didn't think I was going to say or deal with, and the subject is SPI flats. So what we have here is it's kind of a grail piece for me. It's a game called Outreach. I owned it in the past, and it was lost irretrievably due to mold. I did not willingly part with it. I managed to get a wonderful condition copy of this on eBay. I think we're going to find that it's unpunched. This will be a little bit of an unboxing thing here as well, but I'm going to show you the ins and outs of the SPI flat while we're at it. And it's this plastic tray that's not quite 11 by 17, but this is a tray that SPI had custom made back starting in the early 70s. I think 72 or 73 was when they started using these trays, and a number of other companies essentially copied this format with similar packaging. And what we had here was a plastic shell with a cardboard back and a plastic clear top, and then they would create a cover sheet that would then be folded in such a way as to fit inside the top and flap around the back. So the trouble with these, and I always said, you know, I never want to have to deal with these things again because they don't handle well, they don't age well, they're extremely delicate, and they tend to fall apart. And this one is in fact falling apart, but I'm not going to complain because I've been wanting to get this game back in my library for ages. So we get this clear thing here, and then on the back we're going to see the cardboard has separated. This almost always happens nowadays because it's so old. The glue has just completely deteriorated. But in this case, the cardboard, despite having separated, the cardboard's in really nice shape. This is the inside. You could tell this is the inside. And then the cover sheet flaps around the bottom like this. So it's a completely unique size, and then the whole thing would be shrink wrapped together. There was actually a shrink wrapped copy of this in the flat tray up for auction on eBay at the same time, and that went for about $30 more than this one. I almost bid on that one instead. This spent about a month and a half in post office limbo, so it has just arrived. And here we have the rulebook. It's a 16-page, absolutely typical SPI rulebook with minimal illustrations, black and white, small print. Ooh, SPI catalog. Oh, I should do a whole video just on this thing. We will save that. And then this is a 1 to 4, it's a 2 to 4 player game, but it's highly soloable. We have a map which represents, one of the cool things about this game is its scope. This is in absolutely great condition, by the way. This is a huge chunk of the entire Milky Way galaxy. No other game has really done this. And then we have one full-sized, glorious SPI counter sheet, which I'm pleased to report does not have any significant registration problems, which is a recurring issue with SPI. So here's the tray, right? Now, again, the whole thing is granted rigidity by this cardboard thing that goes on the back, which in this case has fallen off. What I will do is I will get some glue and, whoops, I want to suction cup this up and wreck it. I'll just glue this back panel back on. Probably everywhere here, not just along here. I should really get some archival glue at this point since this game is roughly 40 years old. And then you had a number of compartments. These two compartments, this thing which is where you put the tiny SPI die, and then you had these compartments. Now these clear plastic, I love this thing. When I got my first SPI flat tray as like a 10-year-old, I thought this thing was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. In retrospect, it's not very good. This does not lock in any way. It just lays on the top. So you have a couple of choices when storing SPI flats. One is to just keep them unpunched because, you know, they're archival copies anyway, maybe. Many games that SPI did only appeared in either S&T magazine or in the flat and never appeared in boxed editions. Boxed editions were something that SPI only started to do in the last few years of their existence. Many, the great majority, I can't give you an actual number because I didn't look it up in advance, but most SPI titles were not available in a conventional box, only in this flat tray, which is sometimes called a flat box, but we always just called them SPI flats. The other alternative is to tape this down somehow, and I've seen that done with duct tape, no less. I highly advise against that because it's going to leave sticky residue. You could probably get away with a masking tape. Even masking tape, if you leave it on there for long periods, will leave residue and or cause damage when you take it away. Even the higher end masking tapes will still do that. The other alternative is to simply, just like this, store them flat. And this is a huge part of my reservation about SPI flats, is they really want to be stored flat unless you want to mangle the tray somehow. That's fine. I guess if you have like a whole bunch of them and can stack them up, because you can stack them, that's no problem. There were some games, by the way, that were so big that they were sold in 2 or maybe even 3 of these flat trays. I want to say War in the Pacific came in 3 flat trays. I might be wrong about that, but there's definitely games that appeared in 2. War in the East, War in Europe appeared in 2. War in the Pacific was definitely in at least 2. I've never owned War in the Pacific, so I have no idea, or War in Europe for that matter, but I've seen copies in the flat trays. Wellington's Victory, I think, was another one that appeared in the 2 flat trays. There was a soapbox edition. When we say soapbox, I don't have an example because I don't own an SPI soapbox game, which I'll mention in a minute. SPI did what were called the soapbox games, which was a big 3-inch SPI box. Actually, it wasn't 3 inches, it was 4 inches. It's a bigger box than anybody else has done in wargaming, except for DVG, which has a couple of games in that size box, and GMT's got a couple things coming in that size box. So I'm curious to see how those turn out. Anyway, so how would I store this? Now, there's not that many compartments here. There's 24 compartments. That's really more than I need for Outreach, to be completely honest about it. I can use 2 for each color. There's 4 colors, that's 8. I can use 1 for each of these, that's 4 more for 12. These are the wisdom chits that you draw from a cup when you explore one of the special hexes at the beginning at the center of the galaxy. These are beacon stars. So I'm seeing a use for 15 or 16 compartments in this 24 compartment tray. Seems like a waste. But it was a standard tray, right? And, you know, if you had a 1 full counter sheet game, and this is a 400 counter sheet, then you could fit it probably almost every time in a reasonable and organized way into this flat tray. Now, the big trick here is these things have not been made for over 40 years. And so when you find them, they are very, very, very likely to be in far worse shape than this beautiful specimen. This is in great shape. This is probably the best SPI, despite the back being separated, this is probably the best condition SPI flat tray I've seen in at least 15 years. Like I said, they tended not to age well. The glue that holds the shell to the backing tends to just evaporate, go away, dry out, and come loose. These, you can very easily crush them. These, and there's actually a couple of cracks on this one. You got a crack right here and a couple cracks right here. So we're gonna have to be super careful with this. Another crack right here. These become brittle, and very often they become yellowed, like seriously yellowed. And these are really not yellowed at all, but you can see that they are a little bit brittle now. So how am I gonna store this? That's a great question. I've got enough flat box titles that I can probably just stick it with my copies of Europa games or something like that. So I think I'm going to be okay. This is roughly the same size. Do I have an example? Yes, I do. Hold on one second. So this is almost exactly the same size as an Avalon Hill 1-inch flat box. This is Wooden Ships and Iron Men. In fact, you could almost fit this plastic, not quite, but you could almost fit this plastic tray inside one of these. It's not quite small enough to do that with. But it's very similar to this size. Also would be very similar to the GDW flat box size, which is also just about this size to within like half an inch in any particular direction. This was a really unique and special piece of packaging that SPI did. Nobody else did anything like this as well. There was an earlier flat box that SPI did that was all cardboard, which worked exceptionally poorly. It worked so poorly that they got rid of it as quickly as they could, and I think they only actually ever released 3 or 4 or 5 games in that white flat box. I know the original SPI Austerlitz was one of them. There's a couple more, maybe Normandy. Very, very early SPI games. This tray was implemented sometime around 73, 74, 72, something like that. 73 plus or minus a year. It's a really interesting piece of nostalgia and packaging. And now the challenge for me is going to... Because I'll be honest, like I have often said, I don't buy stuff I have no intention of playing. I will totally play Outreach again. I think this is a great and underrated game. You know, maybe it wouldn't be designed like this now, but it's also not a monstrously complicated simulation. So it's not as out of date as a lot of SPI titles of equal age would be. This is 1976. Another thing is that I believe there is a boxed edition of Outreach that's just Outreach, but there is also a soapbox game called the Star Force Trilogy, which is kind of a loosely connected 3-game future history with Star Force, Star Soldier, and Outreach. Now, Star Force is fairly interesting. Decision Games is working on a new version of that. We'll see how that turns out. My confidence is kind of low, to be blunt. But I would like to hear about it because it's a neat game. There was talk of doing a new Star Soldier as well. Of the trilogy, I felt that Star Soldier was the least interesting. I think you're probably going to get a better game like that out of the Avalon Hill Starship Troopers than you were going to out of SPI's Star Soldier. But Outreach was unique. Outreach was to take a step back and make the scale huge, like 2,000 light year hexes and the turns, generational turns, and you're exploring and trying to conquer the entire galaxy. Don't read too much into the connected setting here. It was, like I said, it was very loose. And I want to say that actually a lot of the background was derived by Redmond Simonson. Who was the designer of this? I want to know now. Did it say on the back of the tray? It does not. Game design by Irad B. Hardy. Physical systems and graphics by Redmond Simonson. Game development by Brad Hessel. I think it was Brad Hessel. So the late Terry Hardy was the designer on this. Very underrated game, and actually he designed a number of games that I think warrant a fresh look in this day and age. So hopefully this has been somewhat informative. I didn't really show you a storage solution, but I showed you an old-time storage option that we used to have. And, you know, there are sources where you can get just the flat trays, I'm sure. Friend of mine has a stack of empty ones, for example. So you can get them if you really want to use these trays. But truthfully, I don't recommend them at this time. Like I said, they're all ancient. They're hard to store. They're hard to keep in relatively undamaged condition. And they age very poorly. So if you are lucky enough to get one in this nice a shape, fantastic. I am very, very happy with my copy of Outreach, which is way better than the old moldy one, with actual covered in black mold that I had to throw away 15 years ago or so. I very much regretted that. I had to throw the rest of the Star Force trilogy away as well, but this is the one that I regretted because this is a really neat and cool game that I would love to see somebody redo. I know Decision has the rights to it. I know they were talking about it. They have made no noise in my hearing about redoing it in any serious way, which is unfortunate. So thanks for watching. Please check out the support links, the Patreon and merch store links in the video description. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and click the little bell icon to get notified when new content comes out. Until next time, thanks for watching, and happy wargaming.